So I think about a student that was working in fast food restaurant, and he had to mop the floor. And he said, oh, no, I don't do that. When I applied for this job, it had nothing to do with mopping the floor. What it came down to was the job description of this fast food restaurant had other tasks as needed. And so he was like, well, that is completely unfair.
Entering college can be a pivotal yet challenging journey, especially for neurodivergent people. What happens when traditional paths don't align with diverse needs? Today, we're exploring the landscape of college education for neurodivergent learners. From systemic shifts in college admissions to the importance of soft skills beyond academics, we're talking about what it takes to thrive in higher education. Joining us is Elizabeth West, CEO of EWC College Consulting, who brings a wealth of knowledge on guiding neurodivergent students through their college journey. That's straight ahead on episode 208. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity?
You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
For all of my educator friends out there, I want to make sure that you don't miss the registration window for the Neurodiversity University Educator Hub. This group is full of teachers, counselors, SLPs, administrators, really anyone who works with neurodivergent students who are committed to understanding and supporting neurodivergent kids. Each month, we have a range of resources and events that are cultivated specifically for helping you help your neurodivergent students as much as possible. Registration is open right now. Check out the link in the show notes for more information and to register. All right, my conversation with Elizabeth West is up next.
When I found the Neurodiversity Podcast, I was really kind of
desperate to learn about myself and understand myself.
Honestly, I wanted to find like a
tribe who I could relate to and feel like I fit in.
This podcast brings on guests who seem to be moving neurodiversity more
into the mainstream. And Emily Kircher-Morris is amazing.
I feel like she's talking straight to me.
Her knowledge about people who think differently is so refreshing. Everyone's different.
And the world needs to
Understand them. And that's what the Neurodiversity
Podcast is doing.
helping them understand
Us.
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 Today, I'm talking to Elizabeth West. Elizabeth is the CEO of EWC College Consulting. So, Elizabeth, thank you for joining me today.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Emily.
So it is exciting to see the shifts that are really occurring surrounding how neurodivergent people are supported as they enter the workforce and begin their college journey. For many years, neurodivergent people were just excluded from so many of those opportunities because either they couldn't mask or compensate for their disability. But I really am excited about how, through advocacy and awareness, we're starting to see some of those shifts. So I'm wondering, what are some of the systemic shifts that you notice that are really occurring in this space related to neurodivergent learners going to college?
You know, I think in higher education that neurodivergent learners are also looked upon as adding diversity to college campuses. So when you talk about the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement, there is a real place for neurodivergent learners. And I'm delighted because I am a parent of two neurodivergent learners, and I have been in higher education for 25 years, and I've sort of seen this shift of, you know, calling neurodivergent learners awkward or difficult or, you know, all of these sort of negative connotations, but then now seeing a real shift of honoring and supporting neurodivergent learners for what they can bring to the table. So that makes me happy as a mom and as an educator seeing that.
Yeah. So as this shift is changing, as they're starting to view this more from that diversity and inclusion and all of these different pieces here, are there some real changes that are occurring in the environment that are really influencing neurodivergent students?
So I'm seeing some really positive changes in terms of the support that students get on campus. Again, it is very individual to each college campus. You can't paint it with a brush and say everybody's doing this, but I think of the University of Connecticut just really zeroing in on providing services and strategy coaches to allow for those types of support and security for neurodivergent students. I'm not saying that these supports are not in addition to tuition fees. They are. But I also think that even the acknowledgement that you're having an autism center on campus, or that you are having some kind of, I'm thinking of George Washington University and their Autism and Neurodiversity Institute. And so having these wonderful research abilities on campus and then having that trickle down to resources, I think is so important. And it doesn't have to be these huge universities. It can start very small, start very grassroots, but I also think that it can be very impactful.
I imagine that the staff and the people who are kind of in charge of making some of those decisions at the college or university level are probably kind of like much of the neurodiversity movement in general, maybe are neurodivergent themselves or have neurodivergent children. And so then that is probably also influencing some of those changes that they're really seeing, like recognizing, how we could make the process better, how we could help kids and help them be successful.
I say a lot of times you don't know what you don't know. And so as someone who is not neurodivergent, I don't pretend like I know what the needs or wants of these students are. But being a parent of neurodivergent students, you get that kind of feeling like it's almost like learning a foreign language where it's not my native language, but I am fluent in neurodivergency. But you have to have people like that on your college campuses to be invested, to be engaged, and to really see the benefits of using and providing those resources.
There are so many factors that families consider when they're just trying to determine what that best fit for college might be, whether they are just beginning to explore their options, to the application process, to the logistics of what that college life might even really be like when they enroll. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the considerations that families should have in mind as they begin this process.
I think it's important that you have to know your child, right? And I say that, and I don't mean glib when I say that. I mean, what do they like? What are they interested in? What are perhaps their special interests? So I kind of look at it as kind of a three-pronged attack. Helping neurodivergent students at our practice is one of our specialties. So what we like to do is look at, what do you like? Are you a STEM learner? Do you really like math, science? Or are you more of a creative soul and you love creative writing and world building and, all of those wonderful things? Like, where are your perhaps academic leanings and strengths? And then I love to dive into special interests because sometimes that really unlocks them. And so they start talking about 3D printers or start talking about trains or, anything that they're interested in. And then it really becomes, we're in this together. We're finding the right fit is also knowing that person. So what are they interested in? Special interests. And then we start thinking about colleges. Are you ready to go off to college? Are you ready to live at a college or university? And with so many of our students, you can talk to them and they're like, yeah, absolutely. Then you take them on a college tour and it's very different They are seeing it. They are literal. They are there. And the conversations become very different after those college tours. So what are the considerations? As a parent, you're looking at, will my child be successful here socially, academically, and mental health wise? Mental health and social are different in my book, because I think that a student can be doing well and seemingly well, but there might be something underlying anxiety wise, depression, all of these things that can really derail our students. So when you look at that, are they ready to leave home? If they're not, well, then as parents and students, we also need to be flexible about the choices that we're making. There are so many options to the end game of where you want to be, whether you want to be a doctor, whether you want to be a teacher. A lot of people take different paths. And I think that that's especially hard for neurodivergent students to really look at. If you start here, you can still get to where you want to get to. So we spend a lot of time talking about pathways to success.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the factors that go unnoticed or under-recognized? And I feel like this might go along with just what you were talking about with those conversations with pathways, also some other pieces as well. What are some of those factors that really influence whether a student is successful? I suspect that there are some things that most of us wouldn't really think about that we do need to have on our radar.
So a lot of the things that these colleges are doing well are really attacking 3 different areas. They're looking at academic success. They're looking at social interactions with people and how we can help that success. But we also look at career alignment and not even just if they like doing something. You can like doing something, but is that really aligning to your personality and what your natural tendencies are in the world? So you're looking at those things. Specifically, I think that some of the under-recognized factors are academic support services, student support services, and you have to ask the tough questions. One of those questions is, okay, I see you have all of these great services available. I want my child to take advantage of those. But what is the frequency of my student being able to be seen by your professionals? Is it once a week? Is it once a month? Or is it once a semester? What is your caseload? I think that's the number one question you need to ask because, it's great that you have all of these resources, but if you can't access them regularly, then that becomes a real issue for neurodivergent students. They need to be able to depend on something. So definitely assessing that caseload and frequency. But also, I have students that go on campus tours and they look at the housing and they have a preconceived notion, maybe from TV or maybe from, just pop culture about what it's going to be like to live on campus. But we dig in a little further and we talk about, okay, do you realize that room accommodates 2 people? It's not just one person. You really have to go to pretty extensive lengths sometimes to get a single room. So let's look at that room in terms of 2 people living there. And let's talk about maybe some of the sensory considerations. Let's talk about noise. My daughter has a really hard time with noise. Mm-hmm. And so she wears headphones on the regular just to ameliorate that. But, thinking about those things, I am not a therapist. I am not a psychologist, but when you are looking at preparing students for college, these are the questions you need to ask. And how are you going to protect yourself from being lonely? Loneliness is the number one problem that college students experience today. It's in the Chronicle of Higher Education. And what we're finding is students are, saying, especially neurodivergent students, they're saying they're fine. They're adjusting, whatever. And they're in their rooms and missing classes and unable to adjust. And so what we're finding in higher ed circles is, we need to figure out a way, to get into the residence halls, but to get into their rooms and be like, what's going on? Let's bring you out a little bit in a safe, compassionate way.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a tall order when someone is feeling isolated.
I agree with you. I feel like when I talk to my clients who have transitioned into college, even when they were really well supported and connected when they were in high school, going into that environment, a little bit of social anxiety or a little bit of unfamiliarity and uncertainty can be big barriers there to taking those risks, to getting involved with some things. And on the one hand, sometimes having that roommate or whatever can sometimes be a really great asset. But a lot of times I feel like kids end up with roommates who are fine. There's no problem there, but it's not necessarily like the best friend or whatever maybe they thought. But also it's also not terrible either. It's usually just kind of somewhere in the middle. But it is really difficult. If you feel disconnected from that community, it's hard to be successful. It's hard to get out of that comfort zone.
Right. And, there's always the question, and this is coming from the mother in me, but also thinking it from a professional viewpoint, is how much do I want to sort of design the experience for my kids so that they're not hurt or that, so that they can be successful. But how much do I want to prepare them for what they're going to do after college, what they're going to find in work, in social situations, in relationships. And so I think that there are wonderful programs, there are wonderful colleges that are designed for neurodivergent students. But my fear almost is, okay, so if we give this sort of inauthentic bubble, how are our students going to survive when they get out of that bubble? I get it. I want to keep my kids safe. I want to keep them happy, but I also want to prepare them. And depending on where you are on the spectrum, I know that that's a different conversation, but how do we prepare them for the authentic challenges of life?
I know since the pandemic, I've had quite a few of my clients who have thought about or have taken a gap year. And I think that there are definitely benefits to that, but I often worry about it as well. It's a hard decision to make. I'm curious about your thoughts on gap years for neurodivergent students.
It's interesting because I think that intellectually and just thinking about it from a different perspective, I think that it could be a really good thing. But when we're talking about neurodivergent students, when we're talking about what's realistic, what I have seen is that students fail to persist. They miss out on the momentum. And so they are in this momentum of going to school and having routines, and then they go on a gap year. And the gap year could be work. It could be a global experience. And those have their own issues. I love global experiences for students. I think you have to be ready for the challenges that those present. So gap year, as a practitioner, as somebody who works with high school and college students, I'm open to hearing what their rationale is behind a gap year. I always am hesitant, but hopeful. If this is a way that they can see their path forward, I'm all ears. I want to hear it. And I want to help the parents sort of understand the benefits of it. But I get really, really concerned when the momentum gets just slashed. And with our students, with these neurodivergent students, when you look at resilience, when you look at those coping skills, that's where I get a little concerned shifting.
I agree. I've had a variety of students take a variety of different types of gap years. Some of those kind of global experiences that you were mentioning, which there's such a wide range of them, they could have perhaps a little bit less of that impact on the momentum. I always worry when the plan is work. One of the benefits is that it does give a year for that maturity to develop and to also just make some decisions about what maybe you really want to do. But one of my fears sometimes is that kids who do that, a lot of times they'll say, well, I want to get an apartment, I want to get a roommate, I want to do whatever. And I'm like, once you have bills,
yeah,
it's so hard to go back to school when you have to continue working.
Yeah.
And that's always my hesitation. But I also want to say, I have quite a few clients who really just did need that reset.
Yeah.
They needed a semester or a year to really figure it out. And they have gone back and been successful. It's just a difficult thing. But I think your point about momentum, I think that really is the key. It really can make it much harder then to kind of ramp back up into that academic mindset a little bit. But on the other hand, for some of those kids who are really experiencing burnout, they maybe need that to kind of take a step back and figure out what is next for them.
I absolutely agree. And I also think that once you give a neurodivergent student, and I'm not trying to stereotype, but I'm thinking about my son, basically, and I'm thinking if you gave him a paycheck, he would be done with school because he would actually see, my work is going towards something. I get something as a reward, and it means something to him. It's useful. But when you talk about taking a philosophy class or something along those lines that is a little more vague and a little more theoretical.
Yeah, it's not quite as practical.
Yes. What does this have to do with me wanting to be an accountant? I don't have to do this. So it's a tough proposition. It is a very tough proposition.
Well, I think you're talking about future orientation, which a lot of neurodivergent kids, adults, people struggle with, is really tying like, what am I doing today and how does that contribute to the future? And when we're talking about motivation, which is closely tied to that momentum idea, if you can't tie the task, especially if it's like a task that I don't maybe really want to be doing or that I'm not that interested in, if I can't tie that to something that I really understand I'm going to get out of it, it's really hard to propel myself forward with that. There are clients who I work with who are just hesitant about even just getting a job, like a part-time job, even when they're in high school or whatever. I'm like,
right.
It's not like school. You'll like it because you go, you clock in, you do the job, you get paid. There's not a homework assignment that you have to do. You don't have to worry about getting graded at the end of the semester. And that is actually an opportunity for them to really feel some success, I find, especially if school is difficult. Like they can build some confidence around that. But when we're talking about that gap year, and depending on what their ultimate goals are, it's just such a balance that you have to weigh out what the best decision is there.
It reminds me of a story that I have from a student where I think employers and teachers need to be very specific about their instructions, or if you can't be all inclusive, to really sort of boost up your explanations of why they have to do something. So I think about a student that was working in a part-time fast food restaurant, and he had to mop the floor. And he said, oh no, I don't do that. I don't mop. It wasn't in the job description. and they're like, what? And so he said, when I applied for this job, it had nothing to do with mopping the floor. I mean, so then there's like this conflict and you're being insubordinate and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. What it came down to was the job description of this fast food restaurant had other tasks as needed. And so he was like, well, that is completely unfair.
Why are you asking this? Yeah, to read between the lines. You have to figure it out. And being really clear about those things is a factor for all of us in general. And I know I probably default to almost too much information just because of my own experiences, but my work as well. And, but I feel like it's always just better to line things out. I get it. I empathize with that. That student.
I do too.
Yeah.
I'm not neurodivergent. I'm like, yeah, I get it.
I thought I was going to be taking money from customers and taking orders and putting food in bags. I didn't know I was going to have to also mop the floors.
Yeah. And so if something is not as what it seems like a gap year, sometimes it can be very difficult to convince them to go back on track or something along those lines because it wasn't spelled out for them.
Right. So parents, obviously, and schools are doing the work of supporting our students. And I'm wondering what you think are some of the most important ways that parents and educators can provide some strategies for our kids to help them through the college selection process and the transition and just what's going to help them be successful. What are some active steps that we should really be thinking about as we get our kids ready for this?
You know, I mean, I hate to say it takes a village, but it does take a village because when you're looking at the college admissions process and you're looking at all of the moving pieces regarding the college admissions process, it's not just filling out the applications. It's finding that right fit, and it takes a while. And so I think that parents and teachers need to be patient, because it takes a lot of time to figure this whole where am I going to college thing out. But especially for parents, you need flexibility. There are so many parents that I work with and that I see that have unrealistic expectations of what their college dreams are for their kids. And it's not necessarily always that they are unrealistic in terms of making them overachievers. Sometimes I find that parents, especially of neurodivergent students, say, I don't know if he can go anywhere. He needs to be home. And then I start talking to the student and I'm like, well, I don't know. Let's consider this. Let's consider that. And really taking into account like evidence and data that the student has said and sort of helping the parent figure out if that's a pathway. So I think flexibility and patience are really important. But again, I go back to my mantra, you don't know what you don't know. And so what hurts my heart is when I see students and parents at the 12th hour trying to get everything done for the college applications and essays and all of these particular steps, and they're trying to cram it into a month or 2 weeks. And they come to me with hair on fire. And I'm like, this isn't a good experience for your student. This isn't a good thing for you as a parent. I wish I could have seen you earlier. And, you know, life happens, and we like to help people wherever they are in the process. But if you want to get the most out of that process, you know, starting in your junior year, and people say, oh, isn't that too early? And I'm like, no, you could really start in 10th grade. But if you want to think about like, what is the very beginning, I would say fall of junior year to really get going with just asking these questions and finding out pathways and just really getting that information out. But it takes time. You have to let go of the fear a little bit when we're talking about neurodivergent students. And I get it. I'm a parent and I am dealing with parents that have the same fears that I have. And so I can commiserate, but I can also say, well, I've seen it go really well here. And maybe we look at that.
Yeah. Well, Elizabeth, I'm really grateful for your time today. But as we wrap up, I have one last question for you. If you were speaking directly to a parent who's feeling really overwhelmed and anxious about this upcoming transition, what is it that you would just really want them to hear?
I guess I would want them to find their soft places to land. You know, I would really like them to find people that are safe. So I am a member of a free neurodivergent parent support group, and completely free. You're with your people. You can let it all hang out about hygiene and whatever. But I think as parents, you need support, and whether it's paid support or finding those free options. But as you're going into this process, if you are feeling triggered, if you are feeling overwhelmed, that only directly translates to your student. So the more in control and calm you can be, the more you're giving to your student.
Elizabeth West, CEO of EWC College Consulting. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
I've been counseling neurodivergent kids long enough that I've had some of my clients since they were in elementary school who are now at the post-secondary level. Some are at four-year universities, some at the local community college, some chose to enter trade schools, and some opted to take a gap year or to get a job right out of high school. I've seen those same kids switch paths as they figure out what exactly works for them. But the thing that sticks with me is that for almost all of them, it's one of the first times in their life that they are actively making choices that truly work for them. I've seen kids who hated school decide to pursue higher education after a year in the workforce and be excited about returning to that type of learning environment. I've seen kids switch majors, drop out, and then go back to a different school. It can be scary to watch our kids make these choices, because one of the biggest and longest-lasting adult choices we make is related to our decision about what to do after high school. But so far, I have yet to see anyone make a wrong choice. Some paths might take a bit longer or be a bit more winding, but that exploration will get them to where they need to be, wherever that might be. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Our thanks to Elizabeth West for being our guest. Isn't she the best? Okay, that's enough, Dave. You're being a pest. Anyway, find more information about Elizabeth in the show notes. Oh, and teachers, join the Neurodiversity University Educator Hub. That link's in the show notes as well. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. Our office manager and social media director is Krista Brown. I'm the executive producer, Dave Morris. For all of us, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance.